Om Shruti-Smriti-Purananam Alayam Karunalayam Namami Bhagavad-Padam Shankaram Loka-Shankaram Shankaram Shankaracharyam Keshavam Badarayanam Sutra-Bhashya-Kritau Vande Bhagavantau Punah Ishvaro Gururatmeti Murti-Bheda Vibhagine Vyomavat Vyapta Dehaye Dakshinamurtaye Namaha Om Nama Pranavarthaye Shuddha Jnanaikamurtaye Nirmalaya Prashantaye Dakshinamurtaye Namaha Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditamastu ma vidvishavai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Tam yogamiti manyante.
Tam yogamiti manyante.
Thiram indriya dharanam.
Thiram indriya dharanam.
Apramastada bhavati.
Apramattastada bhavati.
Yogo hi prabhavapyayau.
Yogo hi
Yogo hi
prabhavapyayau.
prabhavapyayau.
2 parts to this mantra. All the mantra yoga is talking about nididhyasanam as we've seen. Sarvendriya dharanam, including manas. The resolution of all, it does not mean nothing is working. Everything works. Buddhi works, manas works. But what do? You bring your focus, your concentration only on, in any meditation, you bring it ekagrita. Normally in meditation, we would bring the focus on Ishvara. That's the difference between the meditation and nididhyasanam. In nididhyasanam, we are trying to get rid of the viparita bhavana, the thinking that I is this body-mind-sense complex, has to go completely. So this nididhyasanam is not a concentration on an object of meditation, but on the ideas that one has picked up in Shravanam and which have been carefully analyzed, logically seen, doubts removed, and yet to come to the stage of aparoksha jnana, that this is all I, is this process of nididhyasana, which his mantra has called yoga, which Bhashyakara defined very elaborately in his Bashyam in the Bhagavad Gita. Dukkha Sanyoga Viyogam. Here also briefly talks about it. It is really Viyogam. It is not yoga in the sense of joining. It's Viyogam more in the sense of dissociation with anything which is undesirable. Undesirable meaning that which is distracting from the Purushartha of Moksha. And there is a second line to this. Apramattaha tada bhavati. Apramattaha bhavati. Tada, at that time. When is that time? At the time of dhyanam or nididhyasanam, one has to be alert. One has to be alert because the same question that Arjuna asked even for in the 6th chapter, same problem. Because the whole process takes place in the buddhi, the mind-buddhi combination. And the mind, unfortunately, is known to be fickle and tends to go up and down, up and down. So the mantra also recognizes this and says, Yogo hi prabhavapyayau. Prabhava apyayau. Dual case. Has a tendency to go up and down, to be born and to disappear, to be born and disappear. And we've seen that you cannot say in Nididhyasanam, there is cessation of all activity of the buddhi. You cannot say that. If there is total cessation of all buddhi activity, then how are we going to gain this knowledge? Knowledge has to be gained in the Uparabidhasana, which is buddhi. Therefore, buddhi cannot become inactive. If buddhi were to be inactive and still gain knowledge, we would gain a lot of knowledge in sleep. That's not the idea. That the buddhi has a single pointed focus on the learnings during Shravana. Words are all that we have. As we will see in the next mantra, nothing else is available for the buddhi as input data. Nothing is available because no other instrument, sensor is available to give you data about this Brahman. So words are all that's available, which is why Guru becomes extremely important. The words have to be handled, have to be presented in a form which the buddhi can do Nididhyasanam on. That whole process is Prabhava Avapyayau. Avapya, Prabhava rises, goes down. Therefore, one has to be apramattaha. It is not a process which can be done mechanically. A process which one is careless about, indifferent about. One has to keep the mind, the buddhi alert. The second line is what we are going to be looking at in terms of what Bhashyakara has to say. But we'll read the whole Bashyam and start discussing from where we left off. Tam idrishim tadavastham
ताम् ईदृशीं तदवस्थां
yogamiti manyante
योगमिति मन्यन्ते
viyogameva santam
वियोगमेव सन्तम्
sarva anartha sanyoga viyoga lakshana
सर्व अनर्थ संयोग वियोग लक्षणा
iyam avastha yoginah
हि इयम् अवस्था योगिनः
etasyam hi avasthayam
एतस्यां हि अवस्थायां
avidya adhyaropana varjitah
अविद्या अध्यारोपणवर्जितः
swarupa pratishta atma
स्वरूप प्रतिष्ठ आत्मा
stiram indriya dharanam
स्थिराम् इंद्रिय धारणाम्
stiram achalam indriya dharanam
स्थिराम् अचलाम् इंद्रिय धारणाम्
bahya antakarananam dharanam ityarthah.
बाह्य अंतःकरणानां धारणम् इत्यर्थः
This is all the explanation of the first line. Tam yogamiti manyante. What is this yogam? Very clearly, Bhashyakara explains that this is that process of sanyoga viyoga. And at that time, the focus is understanding in this avastha, avidya created adhyaropana varjitaha. That is, the nature of the self is what the concentration is on, which is what we hear in the Shravanam stage. And we contemplate upon in the Mananam stage. Avidya adhyaropana varjitaha. Without that, adhyaropa. And look at the Swarupa. Swarupa Pratishtha Atma. Nature of I is what we concentrate upon when. So it is not a stage where everything is shut down, like deep sleep. It is a state when everything is active, but with single pointed concentration. That's why he says, Bahya anta karananam dharanam iti. Everything is resolved into that one understanding of Brahman. Now he takes up the second line. Why apramattaha? Apramattaha means that which is alert, which is not easily distracted. The state in which there is no indifference or carelessness. Apramattaha. Bhashyakara explains that. Apramattaha.
Apramattaha.
Pramadavarjitaha.
Pramadavarjitaha.
Samadhanam prati nitya yatnavan.
Samadhanam prati nityam yatnavan.
Apramattaha. The pramada varjitaha. Pramada is indifference, carelessness. Opposite of that. Varjitaha. Without that kind of, which means what? Total alertness, total concentration on samadhanam prati nitya yat, constant effort towards the focusing one's mind, concentrating one thinking on the words of the Shastra as explained during the Shravanam. So he says, apramattaha, you would understand, pramada varjitaha, samadhanam prati nitya yatnavan. You can understand how difficult it is to get rid of this viparita bhavana. As long as other thoughts of the Jagat, whether they are pleasant thoughts or unpleasant thoughts, a decision to be made, are running around in the buddhi, there is not total focus, total concentration. That is what is the state when pramada is there. Too many things happening. Pramada varjitaha, samadhanam prati nitya yatnavan. One who is completely, totally focused on that during the period of nididhyasanam. Tada tasmin kale
तस्मिन् काले
yadaiva pravritta yogaha bhavati
यदैव प्रवृत्तयोगः भवति
iti samarthyat avagamyate.
इति सामर्थ्यात् अवगम्यते.
Tada means what? When what is referred to? When we start the process of nididhyasanam, that is when the mind has to be, the effort has to be made to bring the mind to focus, to concentrate. Keep the words, one can pick up any phrase in the process of having done Shravanam. One could pick up Mahavakya Tattvamasi. How do I understand that I to be the Brahman, which I've studied so far? How do I understand the one Satyam, which is different from the Satyam and Anritam that I normally deal with? How do I understand that to be I? I have to use two I's in that sentence. How do I understand that to be I? Before Jnanam really happens, Aparoksha Jnanam happens, I is still the individual. So that process of Nididhyasanam, by which that I and the I as defined as that Satyam Jnanam Anantam Brahma are non-separate, non-different. That understanding is what we are trying to achieve. Tada tasmin kale, when we begin, yad eva, yatha eva pravritta yogaha bhavati. When you are progressing in this process of nididhyasanam, pravritta yoga here, nididhyasanam bhavati, at that time itself, one has to build the capability to remain completely concentrated upon the words. So at that time, tada, tasmin kale, yada eva prabhutta yogaha bhavati, iti samarthyat avagamyate. With that, developing that capability to remain alert, even at the time when you begin, one cannot say, let me practice for a few years and then maybe I will get it. As it is a difficult enough process. Probably the last stumbling block before one gains this jnanam. And in that stage, if I don't build that samarthyam, that capability to remain apramattaha, then this progress itself will get delayed. More I allow the buddhi the freedom to go here and there, more difficult it is going to be for the yogi, the one who is sitting in nididhyasana. So yada eva pravritta yogaha bhavati, tada eva tasmin kale eva samarthyat avagamyate. That is why this apramattaha, the one who is apramatta, has to recognize that it is not a fortuitous understanding of Brahman. It is an effort that the person makes to understand Brahman. So it is samarthyat avagamyate. Why? Nahi buddhyadi cheshta abhave
बुद्ध्यादि चेष्टा भावे
pramada sambhavah asti.
प्रमाद
Sambhavosti.
संभव
Sambhosti, if you want to read it together, sambhava asti for understanding. Nahi buddhyadi cheshta abhave pramada sambhavaha bhavati. See, one can say that if there is no activity of the buddhi, see, earlier he said, Siram Indriya Dharanam, And earlier also he said, buddhi, buddhischa adhyavasaya lakshanana vicheshtate. If it does not remain active totally, if it remains totally inactive, then there is no question of pramada. Pramada is indifference, no? If the buddhi is totally inactive, where is the question of telling a person, you be a person of apramattaha? Buddhi is not active. Our famous sleep example is there. Or a person in coma. A beautiful difference you should understand between a person who is in the process of nididhyasana going into coma and a person who has actually done all the processes going into coma. The difference is very simple. A jnani going into coma does not lose the jnanam. He is still a jnani. A person starting on the process of nididhyasana, if he goes into coma, nothing will happen. No, he is apramattaha. Okay, he's apramattaha, but nothing is going to happen. Buddhi is no activity. No activity in the buddhi means whether it is pramada or apramatta, it doesn't make any difference. So he says, nahi buddhyadi cheshta abhave pramada sambhavosti. This idea of a carelessness, indifference, is not there at all in deep sleep, because buddhi is no cheshta. Cheshta bhavat, there is no pramada or the other way, opposite of it. Nothing is there. That is not the pramada, apramata we are talking about. A conscious effort to remain alert at the start of the nididhyasanam is what we are referring to. So, nahi buddhyadi cheshta abhave pramada sambhavosti. Apramata also not sambhavati. Therefore, what should one do? Even as one starts the process of nididhyasanam, this effort towards making the buddhi remain with unswerving focus, concentration on the words of the Shastra as understood during the process of Shravanam, with clarity brought in the process of Mananam, that only concentration, ekagrata. So he says, nahi buddhyadi cheshta bhave pramada sambhavaha asti tasmat prageva buddhyadi cheshta aparamat
प्रागेव बुद्ध्यादि चेष्ट अपरमाद
apramadho vidhiyate.
अप्रमादो विधीयते.
Therefore, tasmat, in the beginning itself, prageva, before saying buddhi resolved, of all other thoughts, all other cheshta, at that time itself, this apramadaha has to be there. Because without that apramadaha, you cannot get that kind of concentration. You got to slowly drop everything else, keeping at Vyavasayatmika buddhi, without any other fluctuations of the buddhi. So you say, therefore, tasmat, at the arambha itself, before buddhi goes into a state of samadhanam, at that time itself, that apramada has to be brought in. It's a concentration, it's an effort. It's not something that's going to happen automatically. I know, I'm sure all of us have made an effort at meditation. And we all know how often the mind tends to move away, the buddhi tends to move away. You do meditation on the words of the Shastra. Brahma Satyam Jagan Mithya I take. I'm going to sit in total concentration on that one phrase. And even as the buddhi is contemplating upon that, all kinds of laukika thoughts come in. They need to be filtered out. In the meditation process, from where we graduate into Nididhyasanam, Bhagavan Shankara gives us a very good method. The first learning is what? That everything is only Ishvara. And that can be very effectively used in the process of early meditation by focusing the mind on the fact that everything is Ishvara. Therefore, when the mind gets distracted to a hurt caused by somebody's behavior, while I'm trying to focus and concentrate on Ishvara, the recognition that that is also Ishvara. It's an order. The whole order we are referring to as Ishvara. Something else is bothering a person who is trying to meditate. Recognize that also is Ishvara and bring the mind back to Ishvara only. So at the early stages of meditation, when there's Ishvara meditation, the focus remains entirely on Ishvara. By this kind of method that's been recommended, mind will stray, bring it back to Ishvara. By recognizing that also as Ishvara. This is something all ancient religions recognized, that everything is Ishvara. Therefore, you pray to anything. You look at any ancient religion, all of which have today died except for Sanatana Dharma. They will allow you this wonderful opportunity to say, okay, my mind is going there. That is also Ishvara. Comes back to Ishvara. From there, with that concentration, that power to have Chitta Ekagrita, when after Shravanam Mananam, a person sits on Nididhyasanam, on yoga, it becomes that much easier to remain with that single thought. Brahma Satyam Jagan Mithya. Everything is Mithya. So that practice of meditation moving away from Ishvara meditation to Nididhyasanam is the process one has to follow. Only then this effort becomes workable. Nahi buddhyadi cheshta bhave pramata sambhavati tasmat prageva buddhyadi cheshta paramat apramado vidhiyate. Even you cannot shut down the buddhi and expect to have apramada. That is what he said in the previous sentence. There's one way of looking at it. There's another line in between. We will skip that and come back to that line. We go back to the last line. And I will explain to you why I am doing that. Kutaha
कुतः
yogaha hi yasmat
योगः हि यस्मात्
prabhavapyayau
प्रभवाप्ययौ
upajana apaya dharmaka
उपजन अपाय धर्मक
ityarthaha
इत्यर्थः
ataha
अतः
apaya pariharaya
अपाय परिहाराय
apramadah kartavyah
अप्रमादः कर्तव्यः
कर्तव्यः
इति अभिप्रायः.
इति अभिप्रायः.
At the beginning of the process of Nididhyasanam, of yoga, he said you have to train the buddhi to be apramataha, to be able to concentrate, focus, bring all the attention to this, what one has learned during Shravanam, and not take it casually. Because, he says, we know this also. Any attempt at bring the mind to focus on any one thing, even on Ishvara, mind has a tendency, the whole process of meditation has a tendency to rise and fall, rise and fall, rise and fall, to distract into other subjects. Says Kutaha, how? Yogaha hi yasmat yogaha hi. This dhyanam, nididhyasanam, or any other form of meditation has prabhava avapyayau, rises and falls. And this is the nature of any kind of concentration, any kind of meditation. It is the nature of the beast. This apajana apaya dharmaka. The nature of nididhyasanam, nature of any meditation, in fact, is to be born and die, born and die. Thoughts come, go, come, go, come, go. How do you, therefore you have to make an effort. Right at the beginning of the process of nididhyasanam, one has to make a conscious effort to leave the focus, concentration on the words of the Shastra as unfolded by the Guru. Otherwise, the buddhi has a tendency to lose out. Yoga hi yasman prabhavapyayau upajana apaya dharmakaha. Losing it. That is the dharma of any meditation. Therefore, ataha, Further down. Yeah. Apaha, ataha,
अतः
upaya pariharaya,
उपाय परिहाराय
apramada kartavya,
अप्रमाद
अप्रमादकर्तव्यः
कर्तव्यः
pramada kartavya, not kartavya, sorry.
प्रमादकर्तव्य
Iti abhiprayah.
इति अभिप्रायः
इत्यभिप्रायः
Ataha, therefore, as an parihara, as an antidote to not losing concentration. Ataha, apaya pariharaya apramadah kartavyah. One has to make the effort to be apramada, not allow the freedom to the buddhi, to the mind, to do what it likes. Therefore, I said, in the earlier forms of Ishvara meditation, for example, one practices this. Bhagavan, if you remember, told Arjuna, Abhyasaha, repeated practice. 2 words used. Vairagya and Abhyasa. Very valid for any kind of meditation, definitely for Nididhyasana. So prior to Nididhyasana, one does all the meditation on Ishvara. That becomes our practice. That becomes our repetition, Abhyasa. And by that time, one has already gained a certain level of Vairagyam from all Laukika things. In fact, some research after this talk about this in some interesting ways. Unless there is absolute concentration on Brahman and on the idea that I am that Brahman or I is that Brahman, it's very difficult to absorb. Ataha apaya pariharaya, to ensure that one does not lose out on the concentration, single-pointed concentration. Apramadah kartavya iti abhipraya. Right in the beginning itself, one makes serious effort to maintain the status of apramada, which is simply that I don't allow vacillation. This is the meaning that you can take from the second line. Bhashyakara says, Apramataha tada bhavati. Yogo hi prabhavapyayo. Yoga itself being a nature of rising, falling, going up and down, one has to make the effort at the beginning to maintain that apramada status, to remain focused, alert. This is one interpretation Shankaracharya gives to this sentence, second line of it, apramata tada bhavati yogo hi prabhavapyayo. He gives us a second explanation. I think it is because of the word bhavati. Bhavati is like that only, whereas this meaning that is given here, which is also correct, but bhavati does not mean like an injunction. Bhavati is like ease. Apramata tada bhavati yogo hi prabhavapyayo. How can you interpret it as saying one should have this attitude of apramada, the effort of apramada, right in the beginning of the process of yoga. It doesn't say you should have. It is not an injunction. It says it is. Therefore, you can also interpret this sentence in another way, Bhashyakara says. Since this is not an injunction, it is not a command to deal with in a certain way. It is only a statement of fact. If that is the way you look at it, then Bhashyakara says, Athava.
Athava.
Athava means alternately, Yadaiva Indriyanam.
Yadaiva
Yadaiva
Indriyanam.
Indriyanam.
Sthira Dharana.
Sthira
Dharana.
Tadanimeva.
Tadanimeva.
Nirankusham Apramatatvam.
Nirankusham Apramattatvam.
Ityataha.
Ityataha.
Abhidhiyate.
Abhidhiyate.
Apramattattada bhavati iti.
Apramattastada bhavati iti.
So another way of looking at this phrase, apramattattada bhavati. Bhashyakara gives one more way of looking at it. I'm not sure which is the better of the two, but essentially he says one way of looking at it is that one has to get down to doing nididhyasanam with the clarity that it is not a chance, a random thing. It is something which has to be focused on and worked on. Or he says, Athava Apramastada bhavati can also be said to be like this. Yadaiva indriyanam sthira dharana. When all the indriyas, sarvendriya manasa saha, have been resolved. If it means resolved, means it must say resolved into what? It has to be resolved into something. It has to be resolved into the Atma as an idea. Athava yadaiva indriyanam sthiram dharana, in the state of already advanced yoga. When all senses, mind, everything have been resolved into the Atma. Then what happens? Tadanim eva, at that time, Tadanim eva, at that time itself, Nirankusham Apramattatvam. Ankusha is a instrument that elephant Mahot uses. You know, it's like a sharp needle iron thing with a curved thing also, to control the elephant. Ankusha. I don't know if you've seen that. The Mahot will be sitting on top of that elephant and prodding it, goading it with the Ankusha. It says, Nirankusham, without the need to goad oneself. See, this is a different interpretation of the first one, where we said that Bhashyakara is saying you have to deliberately create in your own buddhi a situation where apramattatvam becomes natural. Even when you start the process of yoga or nididhyasana. So that becomes like an injunction, like a command. You have to do this. Here he says no. You can look at it another way. Athava yadaiva indriyana yata eva. Yada will normally go with tada. Yada eva At that time when Indriyanam Stiradharana, well, all the Indriyas, Sarvendriya, have been resolved into the Atma. That means it is already in a very advanced state of yoga nididhyasana. Tadanim eva. At that time itself, nirankusham apramattatvam, without necessary external prodding, without my having to do something about it to push it into becoming apramatta. Without the need for that, nirankusham apramattatvam ityataha abhidhiyate. Shastra is telling us it will become a natural process. If you have followed Shravana, Manana and Nididhyasana with practice of Ishvara meditation and get into Nididhyasana, one can also interpret saying Atpramastada bhavati, tada, yada, kada. When one has done all the necessary preparation and gone into the process of Nididhyasanam, and all Indriya are sthira dharana, or steady or resolved, at that time itself, naturally, without any external pushing or pulling, nirankusham apramattatvam, the non-indifference, non-carelessness, alertness, is what? Ityataha abhidhiyate. So when the Shastra says apramastat tada bhavati, it's really saying, don't worry, if you follow the process, if you do your Shravana Manana carefully, follow it up with practiced meditation, and get into state of Nididhyasana at a level where all the Indriyas are resolved, then almost automatically that alertness will come. Automatically, one would not get distracted into other things. One would not take it as a casual, indifferent process. Nirankusham apramattatvam ityeta abhidhiyate. That is what Shastra is saying. This is another way of looking at it. At that one second line, apramastada bhavati. Yogaha prabhavapyayav. That is true. Either way you look at it, that the process of yoga is something which rises and falls, like anything else. If another way of look at it, the Shastra is telling us, don't worry, you follow the processes. You do adequate Shravanam, starting with Shraddha. Get yourself ready in terms of Adhikaritvam. Do adequate Shravanam. Follow it with Mananam. Remove all doubts. And then when you get to the stage of Nididhyasanam, when all that one has understood in the Shravanam, one picks up those words and tries to really focus on them and try to understand what it's trying to tell us. When one follows all of this and gets to the stage of steady dharana of all senses, sense organs, all the karana, bahyabhyantar karanaha, then without any effort necessarily, apramattatvam takes place. It's a bit reassuring. Because otherwise, one of the big problems we all have is that as long as my brain is churning and I'm understanding what the Guru is saying, what the Shastra is saying, I apply, after having understood that, I apply logic on that and say it looks right, but this area I'm not clear. So I get that doubt cleared. Somebody else tells me something else which looks logical. I examine that. I remove that doubt also. I have already done enough preparatory work in terms of my adhikaritvam, viveka, vairag, shamadhamadi. My mumukshutvam is unchanged. I know there is moksha possible. I understand what moksha is. All that is ready. Then I move to the stage of nididhyasanam. Apramattatvam is natural. Because that is one of my worries. That was one of Arjuna's worries as well. So Bhashyakara, there's another way of looking at it, saying that mantra is saying apramastastada bhavati. It is like that. It is without any external prodding, nirankusham. Without any external prodding, this process takes place. To a large extent, this has to do with one's approach. If one has already come to the stage where you cleared the adhikaritvam, one has really worked on, one has done sufficient amount of shravanam, this should become natural. In my opinion, that is all it takes. One is not going to be indifferent to this if one has seriously done so much shravanam and mananam. It will happen naturally. Because everything that is preventing that from happening, all the pratibandhas, this process would have removed. The process of getting ready in terms of preparation, the process of shravanam with shraddha, and the process of mananam, all this would have already removed whatever obstacles that were there. And typically, such a person who has come to this stage, bhakti is natural, has already always sought Ishvara Anugraha and has gained Ishvara Anugraha, continues to pray for Ishvara Anugraha. I love this Ananya Bhakti concept. Mattaha anyaha nasti. Ishvara and I are the same. Who is going to give you help to make that happen? Ishvara himself. Ishvara has grace. So if one has done all this and come to the stage of serious nididhyasanam, all the obstacles should have already been gotten rid of. If that is so, then why should this be an issue for anybody? So, tadanim eva nirankusham apramattatvam. This is what Shastra is telling us. Every Upanishad tells us that beyond a point in our progress of the sadhana, it becomes natural. All the effort to eliminate distractions, to stay focused on this, are all really in the initial stages. That is why Acharya says one takes to sannyasa, if possible formally, otherwise attitudinally. so that single-pointed, focused jignasa never goes away. But taking formal sannyasa, one declares to the world, I don't care about anything else because they are not going to distract me. I am clear where I'm going. But at least in terms of a bhavana, in terms of an attitude, if one can take that stand, then all the laukika things one still deals with will not bother you. Will not be able to take away this apramattatvam. I think this is a very good way of looking at it as well. If we understand what we're doing, and that is where all this helps us, it becomes so much more easy. So his another interpretation, athava yadaiva indriyanam stiradharanam stiradharana tadanimeva nirankusham apramattatvam ityatah vidiyate. By the phrase apramattas tada bhavati. Tada, that time, when we already got done everything else, that time tada apramattatvam is automatic. So one could say in English, second line might say one should be alert at the time because yoga is subject to rise and fall. One could also say, I have to just keep doing what I have to do. As explained to us by the Shastra, this alertness will become natural to me. We will take up the next verse in the next class. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om.
Dhanyavadaha, namaskaraha.
Next weekend, I am not here. I'm traveling. So we will not have classes next weekend. Divyansh, I think you already put a message in the group, right?
Yeah.